Hi, I'm Sylvia Law, and it's for the 21st time, it's my honor to welcome this group to the Rose Scheinberg Lecture. If you have a program, you can look on the back and see the people that we've had in the past, and it's a remarkably accomplished group of people. The formal words we use to describe the program is that to invite people on the cutting edge of race, class, and gender to come speak with folks at the law school. But the more accurate description of what we do is we invite people who are, by and large, not lawyers, but very sophisticated about the law and never law professors. Today we have a program that's solidly in the great tradition of the Scheinberg program. Richard and Jill Scheinberg are responsible for creating this wonderful institution. 21 years ago, they wanted to give some money to the law school, but had the wit and wisdom to understand that it was better to try to target it in a particular way. And the way that they chose was to create a committee that's self-perpetuating. It's dominated by students. We pick 2 students each year from the first year class who serve for the entire time that they're in law school. We're now open for 1L students, and I have handouts for how you apply. It's very simple. I'm going to and the Scheinbergs have been here every time. Maybe Richard might have missed once, but maybe not. They're incredibly loyal to the program and generous in creating it and supporting it. The committee picks the lecturer, organizes the program, and it's an important part of all of our lives. The 3L members of this year's committee, who we'll say goodbye to soon, are Tian Gurmu, right here, and Matt Wasserman in the back will be leaving us at graduation. Molly Louderback, right here, right in front of me, and Nina Sleth, who I think is not here. She has a class. Erin Collins is the lawyering member of the committee, and she's going to be replaced by Naomi Sunshine, who's a graduate of the law school and wonderful. Alina Das has been on the committee forever, but she's had a baby a couple months ago, and she may walk in at any moment. Holly McGuigan has been a longtime member of the committee and can't be with us tonight, but her husband Abdeen is back there, and we'll see her later with a report. Patricia O'Brien is my faculty assistant and helps us. My only job today is to thank all these people and to welcome Gara LaMarche. Gara LaMarche has the honor of being the only person who's ever introduced 2 Scheinberg lectures. Now, that says something, because we usually ask the lecturer to tell us who's somebody who knows you well and respects your work and would be a good speaker. And Gara's name comes up again and again, but this year we're going to break new ground and have him do it twice. He introduced Van Jones in 2010, and that was also a great lecture. Gara began his career working for the ACLU of Texas and of New York. In past decades, he's promoted progressive social change through philanthropy. He helped George Soros to make the Open Society Institute a powerhouse in support of drug policy reform, in support of issues in opposition to mass incarceration, and most visibly and recently in support of LGBT rights and marriage equality. Beginning in 2007, he led Atlantic Philanthropies in promoting the Affordable Care Act. That was a home run, and working to implement it to make it work for the 99%. He's now the president of the Democracy Alliance. And most of all, Gara has been somebody who is just a source of inspiration of thinking about how you work to make progressive social change happen. Gara.
Thank you very, very much, Sylvia. And it's nice to be, I don't know, who has the distinction of hosting Saturday Night Live the most times? Alec Baldwin or something like that. So maybe I'll go for that kind of record with the Scheinberg Lecture. So thank you for having me back. It is a distinct honor to join you today to introduce my good friend Ai-jen Poo on the occasion of her delivery of the Scheinberg Lecture, in which she joins a distinguished line of social justice advocates and thought leaders. Those two categories do not always overlap, but in the case of today's lecturer, they do in multiply reinforcing ways. For Ai-jen is someone whose gifts of heart, brain, and voice have been fused in the service of one of the most important and progressive and impressive social justice movements of our time, for the dignity and rights of those who work in our homes and give care to our children and our elders. It takes nothing away from the honor you've afforded Ai-jen this afternoon to note that you and I are not the only ones to have noticed how special she is. I take pride, in fact, that one of the first such occasions was her receipt of an Open Society Community Fellowship when she was founding Domestic Workers United and I was the director of U.S. programs. Nevertheless, we did not really become friends until we traveled together some years later to India with Gloria Steinem, Sarah Jones, and others to spend time with activists working against the sex trafficking of young girls. Typically of Ai-jen, who believes in a seamless web of solidarity with all who struggle to have their humanity recognized, her vision and social justice consciousness have no bounds. She went on to be recognized by the Ms. Foundation, where I'm a board member, as a woman of vision, and by Time Magazine as one of the Time 100 in 2012, where Gloria Steinem compared her with Jane Addams and Cesar Chavez as a gifted organizer who knows how to create social change from the bottom up. Not to be outdone, Time's longtime rival Newsweek named her one of the 150 women who shake the world, and I have no doubt that Hertz and Avis or Coke and Pepsi are, as we speak, trying to be the first rental car or soda company to give Ai-jen an award. And so, of course, last fall, the MacArthur Foundation recognized her with the equivalent of an Oscar for activists by naming her one of their Genius Fellows. It comes with $625,000 of prize money. Now, I've known a lot of MacArthur Fellows, and many have taken nice vacations or bought that summer house with their well-earned loot. Ai-jen is funding a scholarship for domestic workers and invites others to join her in matching the MacArthur funds. I hope you will. For her, the personal is political in more ways than one. Her own activism on behalf of caregivers got renewed inspiration from watching the ways in which Mrs. Sun, who became a part of her family as she nursed Ai-jen's grandmother through a stroke, now helps her beloved grandmother at 87 to live independently. One of a number of stories in the book she wrote with Ariane Conrad, The Age of Dignity, published by the New Press, where I'm a board member. Theme is emerging here. The personal and political fuse in another way, for those who clean our homes and pick up our children from school and wash and comb the gray hair of those who raised us, work in the most intimate of settings, largely in isolation from others who do similar work. Isolation too often leads to exploitation and even abuse. Ai-jen's genius has been to help many hundreds of thousands of domestic workers find one another and work to improve their lives and conditions, in the process lifting us all to a higher standard. This work has made a real difference in the passage of the New York State Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, and a few years later, one in California. That the struggle has far to go, we know from recent reports about the delay in implementing one of the movement's big victories, new rules by the Labor Department that would have required employers of home care aides for the elderly and disabled to pay at least the federal minimum wage and time and a half for overtime. We are living at a moment when those left out of the social compact, left out of the most cherished progressive victories for social welfare legislation and collective bargaining, are claiming their place in the human rights picture. Not only the domestic workers and caregivers who work with Ai-jen, but restaurant workers and taxi drivers and day laborers and car washeros. Most are immigrants, many are women, and visionaries like Ai-jen are helping them write the next chapter of the great American story. Ai-jen's genius has played a large part in this moment, and her creativity, while now captured in the timeless form of a book, has mostly been deployed in the creation of organizations and movements. From the CAV organizing Asian communities to Domestic Workers United to Caring Across Generations to the new organization Make It Work, where I'm the board of advisors, pressing for an economic agenda in which the lives and concerns of women, like paid sick leave, equal pay, predictable hours, are central. I have the hope that Ijan's book, which you'll hear more about this afternoon, will have the impact on public discourse and awareness that its antecedents have had. Books that captured and further sparked a season of change, like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed, Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique, Michael Harrington's The Other America, and Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow, among others. Compared to Jane Addams and Cesar Chavez, Ralph Nader, and Betty Friedan, you might think Ai-jen Poo was Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, and Robert Moses all wrapped up in one, and you would not be far off, except that what none of this captures is a lovely, accessible human being who does not seek the spotlight so much as to shine it on others, someone whose quiet courage and steel mask a wicked sense of humor and a zeal for all the beauty and joy that life and love and art and nature and friendship have to offer. Please join me in welcoming my friend Ai-jen Poo.
Good afternoon. It's really just such a huge honor for me to be with you this afternoon. I want to start by thanking Jill and Richard Sheinberg, the Sheinberg family, for this great, great honor of giving a lecture in the name of Rose Sheinberg, and also to Sylvia Law and Alina Das and all of the amazing students here at NYU Law School who we've worked with and partnered with in the domestic workers movement over many, many years. And a word about Gara before I start, who is not only the Justin Timberlake of the Sheinberg Lecture, he is also a human rights lawyer, a political strategist, a philanthropic leader for many decades. For those of you who may not be familiar with the world of philanthropy, there's this field that exists today called social justice philanthropy. And it funds everything from work on mass incarceration to low-wage worker organizing to immigrant rights, organizing and civic engagement among poor people and the least visible among us. And it believes in the leadership of the people who are on the front lines of inequality as protagonists in shaping the future. Without the field of social justice philanthropy, there would be no domestic worker movement today. And without Gara LaMarche, there would be no field of social justice philanthropy. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that we have among us a giant who is like the Wizard of Oz, only the real deal, the Wiz. Thank you, Gara, for everything you do. PowerPoint. Who's operating?
Yes, we operate it, right?
Okay.
The video or your PowerPoint? I can share.
PowerPoint. Okay. So one of my favorite speeches of all time was given by the author George Saunders at the 2013 Syracuse University commencement. I don't know if any of you read that speech or heard it. In speaking to the young graduates, Saunders helped them anticipate their futures. And he said, "The things we regret most in life are not the things that you might expect. They are rather failures of kindness. Those moments when another human being was there in front of you, suffering, and you responded sensibly, reservedly, mildly. Or to look at it from the other end of the telescope, who in your life do you remember most fondly, with the most undeniable feelings of warmth? Probably those who were kindest to you." Now, Saunders goes on to admit that kindness is in fact not easy, but he believes that it becomes more natural with age. He quotes the poet Hayden Carruth, who wrote near the end of his life that he was mostly love now. Saunders wished for the graduates to embrace this awareness early, avoiding failures in kindness and striving to be ever more kind and connected to others, and ultimately, mostly love. Now, I come from an immigrant family, and had the great gift of growing up with my grandparents. How many of you had the gift of having your grandparents involved as you grew up as a young person? That's great. I don't know if they grew to become mostly love, but that is certainly where they were by the time I entered the world. They showered my sister and me with kindness. They cared for us, laughed with us, offered important perspective on life. And I learned from my grandmother, I learned how to appreciate and cultivate laughter. She's one of those people who believes that if you laugh deeply from the bottom of your belly 3 times a day, it extends your life. She also taught me how to use the potty, a skill that's proven very useful. My grandmother also taught me how to cook, which is admittedly still a work in progress. From my grandfather, I learned hard work and discipline. He was also a Tai Chi instructor, so I also learned Tai Chi from him. And every night we had a ritual of sitting in his blue chair in his room together, and we watched the show Wheel of Fortune every night, and developed a deep appreciation for the hidden strategies of the show. I feel incredibly fortunate to have been cared for by both of them and carry them with me through life every day. And I'd like to ground this afternoon's talk in your own stories today, and ask that you actually take a few minutes right now, turn to the person sitting next to you. Hopefully it's somebody that you don't know, but turn to the person sitting next to you and share a short story about someone in your life who's cared for you and the value of that relationship in your life. We'll just take a couple of minutes to share back and forth.
Mind if I took 30 seconds to put a light on you? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start wrapping up. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. It's my favorite thing to watch the energy in the room when we're sharing stories about the people who we love and care about. Can we give a round of applause for all the people in our lives who've cared for us? My grandparents, both of them were extraordinary people. And even though they're on different sides of my family, they actually had very similar life experiences. Growing up in rural poverty in China, experiencing war, migration, raising families, hard work, each a very full life of hardship and triumph. And then in their later years, their stories begin to diverge. My paternal grandfather lived to the age of 93, a very long and for the most part healthy life. However, the final months will haunt me forever. After my grandfather's vision and other functions started to deteriorate, we were unable to find appropriate home care support for him and had to place him in a nursing home against his wishes. I visited him there, and even now, my memory of that first visit still gives me the shivers. My grandfather's room, his bed was in a dark room with about half a dozen other people, some completely still and unmoving, the others wailing in pain and suffering. It smelled of mold and illness, and when I found him, it was clear that my grandfather hadn't slept or eaten for what seemed like days. And though he was alive enough to tell me he was afraid, I knew that he was dying inside. And he passed away after only 3 months in that facility. Now, on the other hand, my maternal grandmother is still alive, and she just turned 89 a few weeks ago. I visited her for Lunar New Year. We celebrated the year of the ram, goat, sheep, whichever. There's some controversy over which animal it is. She lives in her own apartment in Southern California, across the street from a Chinese grocery, not far from a Chinese hair salon that knows how to do her perm just right. She's incredibly active. She goes to church twice a week, and she sings in the church senior choir. That's their Thanksgiving performance last year of the senior choir. She and I play mahjong together, although I'm not her preferred mahjong partner. She lets me win about once a year on my birthday, just so that I keep engaged. She thinks it's a lifelong process, for me to learn how to play mahjong appropriately. But she is living life on her own terms at 89. And after caring for so many of us in our family, it just brings me so much joy to know that at 89, she's able to live life on her own terms. 2 grandparents, both made of extremely strong stock, both loved dearly by their families. So what made the difference? Mrs. Sun. Mrs. Sun is the home care worker who looks after my grandmother. A few times a week, Mrs. Sun comes and assists with the things that have become more difficult for her over time. Things like lifting, cleaning, sometimes cooking, although that's usually a team effort, buying groceries. Our last big scare was when my grandmother slipped and fell as she was rushing to catch the bus to get to church on time. Now Mrs. Sun or her husband always make sure that one of them gets my grandmother to church. Mrs. Sun is also an immigrant from China and has become a key part of my family's care team. Her own family of 2 grown sons and a husband have become an extension of ours. Now, these relationships are really strong and, in fact, quite beautiful. But like so many families with aging relatives, we did not have a plan. That lack of a plan proved painful in the case of my grandfather. A few years later, in the case of my grandmother, we were just fortunate to find Mrs. Sun. We just got lucky. And having her has changed everything, particularly my grandmother's quality of life. And what's become clear to me in all of this is that we as a country don't have a plan either. Whether you're an overstretched family caregiver, an underpaid professional caregiver, or you can't afford the long-term care you need, or you can't find the right long-term care option for your family, you're not alone. It's all of us. And it's gotten to the point where we as individuals, as families, and as a nation can't afford not to have a plan. Because every 8 seconds, someone turns 65 in America today. This year, 4 million of us will reach retirement age, such that by the year 2030, 20% of our population will be over the age of 65. 20%. The baby boom generation is aging, plus advances in healthcare and medicine that have extended our life expectancy by nearly 20 years since the year 1930. The combined effect is what some call the silver tsunami. I prefer the term elder boom. Whatever you call it, what this means is that by 2050, 27 million of us will need some form of care or assistance just to meet our basic daily needs. Now, for the vast majority of the 27 million of us, care does not mean or will not mean living at home with the help and support of someone like Mrs. Sun. For most, elder care will mean something more like what my grandfather experienced, unless we do something very, very different. And that dark ending that my grandfather faced is too costly. There's that emotional cost of what my family lives with, the feeling of failure. There's what he endured, my grandfather, in his final months. But then there's also the financial cost. The average private room stay in a nursing home costs $87,000 per year. That's unimaginable for 27 million people. Possibly, it's actually literally not possible. So then perhaps the solution is simple. Perhaps all we need are more caregivers like Mrs. Sun. The more than 90% of us who would much prefer to age in place in our homes and connected to our communities could just be supported to do so by caregivers like Mrs. Sun. And we could actually age the way we want. So instead of spending that $87,000 per year on nursing homes, we could spend that money on quality, trained home care workers like Mrs. Sun, right? Well, not exactly, because the more than 2 million workers who currently work in homes as home care workers, personal care aides, and domestic caregivers today can barely sustain in their jobs. It's the kind of job that people don't even recognize is a real job. It's called companionship or help, anything but real work. And we're still fighting for inclusion in basic labor rights and protections. Many of the workers in this workforce are also undocumented immigrants, trapped in the shadows. The wages are unfathomably low, average wages less than $9 per hour, so low that the women, mostly women of color, that we count on to care for our loved ones simply cannot care for their own. It's to the point where 30% of the home care workforce must rely on public assistance for food security. And many live in fear of being separated from their own families as a result of our immigration enforcement policies. So what does this mean in the lives of the women who do this work as professionals? Mirla Baldonado is a Filipina immigrant caregiver in Chicago who helps elders in the community live independently. She's had over 20 clients, working 24-hour shifts, 4 days a week, lifting her clients in and out of bed, bathing, cooking, administering medicine, helping with physical therapy, cleaning. For all of this work, Mirla takes home between $5 and $9 per hour. And then what does Mirla do? Because she's also a parent, She sends money home to the Philippines to support her 5 children who are living there with relatives. But with that, plus the cost of rent for the room that she lives in, some weeks Mirla barely has any money left over. And she described to me on several occasions that she has gone for days eating nothing but hard-boiled eggs and bananas to survive. So we can stay on this same dark path of unsustainable home care wages and working conditions, which reinforces an unsustainable overdependence on nursing homes that no one wants to live in. Or we can seize upon this moment of demographic change, this moment of opportunity to create a whole new system to care for our families and care for the workers too. Think of this as a care grid, like the grid of infrastructure that once brought water and electricity to every home in America, a grid of infrastructure and capacity to bring real caregiving choices to every family in this country. And if we look closely enough, all around us we can see the seeds of what is possible and where we need to go in the future. We have naturally occurring retirement communities and the village movement, designed as communities for older people to pool resources and purchasing power and share services that enhance their quality of life, like caregivers. In the state of Hawaii, this legislative session, champions will be introducing the first state social insurance program for long-term care, supporting families to receive their choice of long-term care for up to 365 days. The state of Washington has created the country's foremost training facility for home care workers, training 40,000 professional caregivers in 12 languages in consumer-driven care, utilizing the most cutting-edge training content and methodology. This facility has elevated the quality of care for people in the state, as well as the quality of jobs. And the average wages for home care workers in the state of Washington is up to $12 and $13 per hour. As a result, Washington state is among the most prepared among all states for what's to come. And in the last 4 years, domestic workers and caregivers have passed statewide legislation to establish basic rights on the job in 4 states, with Massachusetts being the most recent state whose bill just went into effect on April 1st. Yes. One of the strongest bills in the country to date, including maternity leave for caregivers. These examples are just the beginning of what's needed. The care grid of the future must be a connective lifeline of creative solutions that individuals, families, public policy leaders, legislatures, and entrepreneurs create together. It will support choice in how we receive and access care. It will make quality care affordable and accessible, while bringing poverty wage jobs out of the shadows and turning them into millions of good care jobs for the future. This is our moment to take caregiving, what has been a private and often isolated conversation, into the national public policy conversation about the future of this nation. Another caregiver whose story I write about in my book, Erlinda, shared about a client that she calls my lady, who always would ask her to sing to her because Erlinda has a very beautiful singing voice. One particular day, rather than ask her to sing, she said, "Give me your hand." And Erlinda knew right away that she was going to transition. So she immediately got on the phone and called the family together. And together they stayed with her lady. And she was proud that she could be there in that moment, ensuring that her lady was in good hands and surrounded by love in that moment. Just as Erlinda's family remembers her kindness, Erlinda thinks of her lady often. We remember in life and ultimately rely on those at the end of our lives who are kindest to us. We need a care system that is mostly love, a care grid that channels dignity, enhances choice, respect, health, self-determination, and fairness and love. Especially as more and more of us age and hopefully grow in kindness, we need a care system that cares for all of us, including the workers. And in creating such a system, we will begin to lay the foundation for an economy and a democracy that honors the full diversity of who we are and who we're becoming as a nation, opening up jobs with real pathways to opportunity, out of the shadows, real pathways to citizenship, and new supports for workers, immigrants, our elders, people of all generations and walks of life. And to be clear, the demographic shifts in this country that we're about to experience are profound. By 2040, we will be a majority people of color nation. And by 2030, we will be 20% over the age of 65. The older population will be significantly whiter, and the younger population will be significantly more of color, particularly immigrant. In this context, we could run the risk of becoming the kind of country where our interests are constantly being pitted against one another along lines of race and generation, if we don't present an alternative vision for the future of this country that actually holds and recognizes all of our dignity. It will be up to us to make it clear that amidst all of this change, that there is a shared vision for a healthy, secure American family that benefits all of us. And that coming together toward that vision will ultimately make the country more whole and connected. Care can connect us all. A vision for a more caring, just future for all of us, and it will take all of us to create. And that is what Caring Across Generations, our campaign, is all about. I'd like to cue up a video to bring into the room some of the faces and stories of the leaders of this campaign, and then I just have a few more thoughts to leave you with after the video.
Sorry, 1 moment.
You are a wonderful, joyful, loving person.
You're like a father figure to me.
You are just gentle. We care about each other, and we take an interest in each other.
Before I came to this country, I was taking care of my grandmother. So I felt that I can do the job.
I took it for granted that, if I wanted to do anything, I would get up, go out, shopping, visiting people. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. I noticed you were changing years ago.
After I been able to get you to go outside, I got the opportunity then to go places with you.
When I got home from rehab after being away for over 3 months, the first thing I saw were 8 balloons that you had put up around my door, welcoming me back, and I knew I was truly home. I am totally honored to be a caregiver for you. It is a great privilege and a joy for me. There are so many things that I still can't do that I depend on you to help me. And the help is given so freely and with so much love, and that makes me feel a lot better. And still independent, but as I said, independent with benefits.
we are not only just caregivers, you're a nutritionist, you're a nurse, you're the doctor.
You are my mother, Julie Davis, and you are loved by a whole lot of people.
You're Dr. Morris Steiner. You are my patient. You're a pediatrician, war veteran. You have taught me things that I know would take me through the rest of my life.
You are my community, but you're even more than that. You are my friends. And as much as you've done for me, there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you also.
May, who's seen this 50 times, is still crying. Okay. So that gives you a sense of the stories that we're connecting in this vision for a more caring America. And because we're at one of the premier public interest law schools in the nation, I want to just say a few words about politics, policy, and the new social contract in this moment, because it's all related. We live in this really unique moment in the history of this country. Inequality is at an all-time high. Our democracy is in jeopardy with unprecedented amounts of corporate money flooding into elections and corporate lobbyists defining the realm of the politically possible. The far right has gained enormous momentum in recent years. Republicans control both Congress and the Senate and could conceivably gain control of the White House next year. Our courts have been stacked by conservative judges over the course of the last 30 years at every level on up to the Supreme Court. And there are more conservative controlled state houses today than there have been in the last 100 years. So what does this mean? It means that the political spectrum continues to get pulled towards the far right, as does the realm of public policy. Low-income and working families are, for the most part, on the defensive, struggling to defend the gains of past generations. And if we're not careful, we'll soon be forced to defend the gains of the 1930s. Now, what does that mean in the real lives of people? When the New Deal was being negotiated more than 75 years ago, Southern members of Congress refused to support the labor law provisions of the New Deal, including the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, if they included two groups of workers, farm workers and domestic workers, who were African American at the time. So, in a concession to Southern members of Congress, those laws were passed, explicitly excluding those two groups of workers. And to this day, farm workers and domestic workers live and work in the shadow of racial exclusion. Poverty wages, long hours, unsafe conditions at the bottom of our economy, despite the precious work for millions of families. Over many generations, farm workers and domestic workers organized and sought to change those exclusions. In 1974, domestic workers successfully gained inclusion in some minimum wage protections under the Fair Labor Standards Act. It took organizing, movement building, and advocacy. But there was a loophole that remained in place, something called the companionship exemption. Again, excluding caregivers for the elderly and people with disabilities because it was companionship, not real work. Now, this current generation of the domestic workers movement has been fighting to change and address these exclusions once and for all. Since 2009, when the first group of domestic workers went to the Department of Labor in Washington to push for stronger enforcement of domestic worker rights, we have been working to bring the nearly 2 million caregivers who are still excluded, now once and for all, under minimum wage protection. And I'm proud to say that in what I believe to be one of the most important victories for low-wage workers and women of this administration, we were successful. On January 1st, the new home care rule change was set to go into effect to bring 1.8 million home care workers and caregivers under minimum wage and overtime protections for the first time in 75 years. Unfortunately, however, let's clap. We should clap. Yes. Now, the story takes a turn because the home care industry lobby, which does not want to pay minimum wage and overtime, filed a lawsuit to try to stop the rule from going into effect. And the case was heard by a DC district judge that not only ruled in favor of industry, but vacated the entire rule. So now the DOL, the Department of Labor, is appealing the ruling, and it's being fought out in the courts. And in the meantime, our movement is actively working in partnership with consumers and other advocates at the state level to push for states to adopt and prepare to implement the change so that the rule can be implemented without any negative impact on how services are delivered, and we create a climate of inevitability for this change from the states on up. It's an ongoing struggle in 2015 for these basic protections. And I'm sure many of you are also following the litigation against the president's executive action on immigration, yes? So as you see, these basic changes, so minimal and so far actually from what we actually need, right, are under severe threat and attack. And the truth is we are and will be fighting on every front in this way, both defensively and offensively, because our movements are relatively weak in relationship to what we are up against. And our old models and institutions that have anchored progressive power and social change are outdated. From trade unions to old models of electioneering, we simply haven't kept up with the changing global economy and all the new alignments and concentrations of wealth and power that define this reality that we live in. We haven't built the power to define the future in our new context. But I feel incredibly hopeful, and I want you to feel that way too. Because change is happening all around us in the economy, in the nature of work, in the structure of families, in our demographics, in our popular culture and American political life. And amidst change, there is always opportunity to contend. There's always room for new protagonists, new alignments, new convergences of communities and movements. And the experiences that have existed at the margins are becoming increasingly defining of the whole. Domestic workers used to be considered a shadow, marginal workforce. Today, the conditions that are associated with domestic work are increasingly defining of the whole of the American workforce. More and more people can identify with domestic workers and caregivers. More and more people can identify with the formerly incarcerated as more and more experience being locked out of real opportunity in this unusually unequal and cruel economy. Those of us who not only want progressive change, but need it, are actually in the majority. And if we were to look back at the New Deal and think about the story that I told, even the gains of the 1930s and 60s had holes. They were not gains that necessarily benefited or uplifted all of us. There were profound exclusions with profound implications. So, what gives me hope and energy in this moment is that in the midst of all of this change that's happening all around us, we have the opportunity to put into place a new framework for public policy, a new social contract, a long overdue new social contract, one that learns from past errors and exclusions and what reflects the true essence of the 21st century reality, the reality that we live with today. And it will be this generation, you at this law school, us together, who will lead the way in shaping what that new social contract looks like. Just as law students right here at NYU worked alongside domestic workers to craft the breakthrough New York Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, my hope is that all of you will work alongside the many movements for social justice today to develop the new social contract that will uplift all of us. With one major caveat: building power must be a focal point of that work. We must build a significant force behind our values if we want our values to shape the future of the social contract. We must achieve an entirely new level of power and impact in our social movements to open up the political space to win what our communities and our children truly deserve. The new social contract must not be defined not by what's considered politically possible today. We must build the power to fundamentally redefine the realm of what's possible, and it is fundamentally a question of power. Now, there is a path to power through organizing and movement building, and where it's unclear, we must simply get out there and create it as we build it. Through elevating new protagonists like domestic workers and other low-wage workers, through building powerful movements with integrated strategies where policy, litigation, narrative, and culture change, organizing, and civic engagement, all of it are part of a shared strategy to build and exercise the power of real people. We need to be dreaming boldly and organizing broadly. We must be prepared for a long-term journey. And we must always remember at the end of the day what is politically possible and ultimately what is considered justice will be defined by how powerful our movements for human rights and dignity become. And that is up to us. To that end, on each of your chairs at the table out front, there's a way for us to keep in touch. If you fill out the card that is on your tables, even with just your name and email, then we can start building the caring majority, one person and one card at a time. The caring majority we need to live and work with dignity in this country. And I so hope you will join us. Thank you so much. Questions? And I really do hope this is uplifting. It was meant to be very optimistic and hopeful. You all are so serious. Okay, good.
I have a microphone for you.
Thank you very much. I can speak loudly. Oh, okay. Thank you so much. You paint the very positive kind of picture of the caregiver-recipient relationship. Mm-hmm. Do you focus on, and I guess this is maybe the lawyer in me, the potential of abuse, the caregiver, abuse aspect? So I don't know if that's something you focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, we definitely know that abuse happens on every side of this equation, whether it's of workers or of seniors or of family members. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is in a shadow industry, a lot of shadow behavior happens. And part of what we need to do is really recognize that this is a profession, this is an essential part of our economy. And these caregiving relationships are something that need to be formalized in such a way that people really think of them as professional relationships, and it receives the kind of training and support that any other professional sector would. So that's sort of how we think about it. We absolutely recognize that abuses will happen, and that is definitely one of the things that we're trying to prevent in the future. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked about in Washington State how the higher wages and higher training, how it translates into better care. How do you rate that in the country? What is your standard of better care?
Well, right now there are no training standards for home care workers and personal care aides. And oftentimes agencies that say they offer training, what they're offering is like a 3-page handout that you fill out and hand in. And so it's really all over the map, the kind of preparation that people are receiving. There's everything from cultural competency issues to safety issues and all kinds of issues that are not being addressed on the front end through lack of preparation. And so one of the things that we're really focused on is looking at some of the best, most comprehensive models for training around the country that really take into consideration the varied conditions and experiences and situations that caregivers, professional caregivers will walk into, and making sure that people have the best baseline preparation as possible, and then also counting on families and consumers to offer a level of training as well, personalized training and support. So, I think it's kind of like, in general, I think what I would say is like caregivers, both family caregivers, family members who are caring for their family, and professional caregivers are like superheroes. They're just, it's like the unsung heroes of our society. And we need to move from a superhero model to a super friends model, where we're actually like all hands on deck, figuring out what are the public policy solutions, what are the systems, what is the training and support we can offer to make these jobs better jobs, to facilitate the role of the family caregiver, and to elevate the quality of care. It's going to really be it's not one solution. It's going to have to be a series of innovations, I think.
I'm interested in finding out the training. Specifically, one of the things that I find that caregivers lack is the ability to maintain the person-oriented to time, person and place. I go and see different places, whether it's assisted living, where they have their personal aides, where it's total silence. And I think this is an area that should be an area of concentration in terms of teaching the aides to maintain that person alert. And it's not happening. And I think that's a serious problem with the aides. And the other thing is teaching them skills in terms of listening skills, which they often don't have. And they often lack empathy. Not because necessarily they don't have the empathy, they do not have the skills, the listening skills that an elderly will require, and thereby sometimes the aides not being prepared, they become abusive. How are you going to, or how are you addressing those needs?
Well, you raise a few important points. One, I think, is just the approach to caregiving in our current system, which is very much an institutional model, a nursing home model. Has any of you seen the documentary Alive Inside? Okay, it's about personalized music therapy and the treatment of people with Alzheimer's and dementia in nursing homes. And a lot of issues get raised in that documentary, but one is really about how much our entire healthcare system and our long-term care system is oriented towards delay of death and pharmaceutical-based treatments and expensive procedures as opposed to quality of life, and a more human approach to caregiving, one that involves good listening, real presence, more caring, like putting the care back in healthcare, right? And so that is one of the big culture shifts that we think needs to happen, is that there has to be a much more human and humane approach to healthcare generally, but a real focus on quality of life and dignity and independence and choice and actually living longer, a full life longer, right? The idea that we are all living longer is actually an incredible blessing. The fact that we have longer to learn, to teach, to connect, to work, to contribute, to receive, and it is only realized, that potential is only realized when we have the right supports and plan in place to support people to live well at different stages of life. And I think that that's a big area that requires everything from kind of rethinking the way our nursing home care system works, to creating more home and community-based options, to strengthening this workforce, better training, better preparation, both for families and for the workforce. There's so many dimensions to it, and I think a lot of what you're saying is that we have to be more humane overall and how we think about this work and these relationships, and I would say that our campaign really agrees with that.
But I think it's not just general. You have to have an agenda for those workers with a specific skill.
Mm-hmm.
Those skills can be taught,
Mm-hmm.
and they are not.
Mm-hmm.
When the training that they supposedly these agencies provide is maybe how to change them, how to move them. But in reality, there is no training in terms of how to maintain that person alert, connected,
Yeah.
and feeling competent, which is basic for that person to really live a meaningful life.
Yes,
And I would like to see a program, actually.
Well, that's actually good, because there are a few different pilots that are happening around the country that are about stronger, much more in-depth and thorough training in a range of skills for this workforce. And I'm not sure if it includes everything that you're thinking of, but there are 6 pilots happening around the country that have been supported through the Affordable Care Act. And there are groups like ours that are piloting mini pilots around the country on everything from personalized music therapy to for people with Alzheimer's, to mindfulness for caregivers, mindfulness training and meditation for caregivers. But I think the point that you're making, that this is skilled work, that it requires real skills, and it's difficult, but it is trainable, like that is absolutely right. That is absolutely right.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Bernard, and I'm a child caregiver for the past 27 years. But I have been in contact with home care workers because I've adopted 2 seniors near my home that I check in on every day. And I have found the reality of it all is that even though some of these girls are trained to do the job that they do, they measure it by the monetary part of it. It's like, I'm not being paid fairly, so I'm going to give what I'm being paid for. And this is a reality. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are skilled. A lot of them have learned well, but because they're not being paid fairly for what they do, they measure what they do. They do just what they think they're being paid for and nothing more. And I see that every day as I talk to home care workers within the same community that I monitor with seniors. And I do understand them. I do understand that it becomes frustrating when they're like almost like minimum wages and they work very hard and they have to give a lot of themselves. And they're not going to give so much of themselves if they're not being paid fairly. And to those who should be trained, if we compare Seattle to New York, they are being paid fairly, and they're going to give just what they're going to be paid for. And it's hard to just say it and not understand it, because the truth is, it happens in my industry as a nanny too. A lot of nannies go out there and they grow to love these children, and they put their whole selves into this work, and they really work hard, even though and some of them do measure their pay. They measure it, and I'm not doing anything more than enough, and that is all, it all stems from respect. A lot of people are still not being respected for the things that they do as domestic workers, home care workers, nannies, child caregivers, whatever you call them. So if they don't get the respect, they have to live from day to day. And they have to live on these minimum wages that they get and the small money that they get. So they choose to do what they think is worth it to measure up. So we have to correct so many things in the industry, and that's one of the things. And so what is fair pay? What is fair pay for fair work? Thank you.
I had a question about models that you see elsewhere when you talk about, great vision and pilot projects being done in other localities that are successful or looking likely to be successful. But outside of the U.S. borders, do you, in your project, in your work, see other countries, other nations that are doing a better job, systematically doing a better job? That we could, rather than invent something and dream something, if it's actually happening and operational somewhere else.
Yeah. Well, in my book, I write about Japan and Germany, who both have universal long-term care programs. And I also write about a program in Japan called the Caregiving Relationship Tickets. The Caregiving Relationship Tickets, which is essentially a sophisticated time banking program where you can go and provide care for a neighbor and then bank that time and those services and ask that someone then care for your mother who lives on the other side of the country for the same amount of hours or services, or you can switch, you can trade, you can barter, or you could get those services for yourself, that assistance for yourself. So it's a really wonderful and very effective time banking program that's been scaled in Japan. And they're testing versions of it here in New York, I believe. I know in Los Angeles as well, there's some test happening. So I think that particularly those kinds of solutions that leverage innovations in technology, we're going to see more of those spreading, which I think is great. And a lot of people ask me about robot caregivers. It's true, they do. People are obsessed with robots right now. And they talk about the fact that in Japan, they're starting to use robots as caregivers. And my sense is that it's not in any way the way that people think about it. And the way that we collectively, I think, should think about it is that there's actually a tremendous role for technology in improving the quality of care and improving the quality of these jobs. These jobs are incredibly strenuous, difficult jobs that technology could potentially make much easier. And so how do we think about the values that will drive tech innovation in this space and make sure that it's really about improving quality of life and quality of jobs and quality of care, as opposed to, the next big tech trend that drives sales in whatever market. And so I do think that there will be a really important role for technology in helping us find some of these creative solutions. Mm-hmm. There's in the back over there. Yeah.
So you had mentioned earlier that any resource shortages have these amazing ways of cultivating divisiveness among already marginalized people.
Mm-hmm.
So I see you organizing almost two invisible groups, right? One, the elderly,
Mm-hmm.
the other, the workers, and there is, at least from my perspective, immense potential to pit those two groups against each other.
That's right.
Which I consider to be sort of tragic outcome of the status quo. But I'm curious, in your organizing models, how do you not only give into that but overcome that and build community between two groups whose liberation is clearly mutual, not clearly, but from an outsider's perspective, tied, and how do you base build and power build on both sides of that equation without creating false competition?
Right. No, that's a great question. I think partly it's a long-term, short-term. There's a long-term, short-term dynamic to it. In the long term, like this vision of more choice, better quality, more affordable, and better jobs, like everyone agrees with that. In the short term, we're dealing with state budgets, state Medicaid budgets that keep getting shrunk and cut. And so even in thinking about this home care worker wage increase or bringing home care workers under minimum wage and overtime protections, we are dealing with this very challenge that you lay out in real time, because what the states are now doing, and this is why I name that conservative control over states has real implications for people who are struggling to survive already. Basically, they're taking this as an opportunity to say, well, sure, you want higher wages, then we're going to cut services. We're going to cap hours. And so we have been actively working with consumers and people with disabilities and senior advocacy groups to make sure that this rule change is implemented in a way that doesn't have any negative impact on services. But the truth of the matter is, I mean, we've been able to beat back cuts in California, but in other places we may not be successful because we have a lot of organized groups in California who have visibility and power and who know how to really push on the legislature. And that's, again, why I say it is a question of power. It's like, can we build enough power in enough time to be able to ensure that not only do we prevent harm, but that we actually get to a place of being on offensive to create what we need, protect what we have, create what we need. And it's hard because it is an ongoing struggle where people are asking us to choose, right? To rob from one bucket for another. I mean, people are talking about cuts to childcare to fund elder care. Really? No. We're families, and we actually need a huge reinvestment in families as opposed to these cuts in services. And so we have to figure out how we build enough power through aligning enough of these different constituency groups that we can prevent these cuts while actually figuring out how we get to the place where we can create the solutions that actually lift all boats. And many of them will require a significant government investment at a time when the agenda is to shrink government, right? So that's a thing that we're going to have to really face head on. Is that, do we want to be the kind of country where we turn on each other, or do we want to turn to one another and really kind of and build the power we need to win? It's really the hardest thing because it's life and death. You know, it's like for everyone involved, these are really serious stakes.
I just wanted to thank you for starting this conversation with the words kindness. I attended law school, have practiced law for many years, and have even taught law. And the word kindness is rarely if ever heard. I don't know, maybe I missed Kindness 101 when I went to law school, but it's rarely if ever mentioned when we talk about these issues. And yet, as someone I've done in the last 20 years, I've been a human service provider. And it's been through that process that I've come to understand the importance of that sort of almost intangible,
That's right,
very important component of how we interact with one another.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it among early childhood providers, how you can have someone who's technically very knowledgeable. Happens in medicine, you can have a surgeon who's technically very knowledgeable, but who lacks the human empathy and ability to interact in an appropriate way with patients. And I sometimes wonder if we can't find a way to make sure that training is necessary, but we also understand that it's not sufficient. The issue that the woman in the back raised about being able to impart knowledge to people who work with other human beings about how to interact with them, not only in terms of technical skill, how you move a person from one place to another, but how you interact with them as a human being, how you're present to them. I think that's an important part of the work that you're doing. And your encouragement that someone take that up, I think is something that I really support. I think it's really, really important. So thank you very much for kind of introducing that component to this discussion.
Thank you. No, I think that relationships and the quality and texture of our relationships are going to be the key at every level. How we receive and provide the care that we need in the future, and how we also organize and build the movements that we need to win. And yeah, kindness is key. Mm-hmm.
Given the very inspiring way that you described this problem, I think we can only conclude that it's not only universal, but really nonpartisan. And I'm wondering to what extent we can reach out on that basis to not only our legislature here in New York State, but even federally. Money is the issue.
Yeah.
It's the bottom of the problem. And we've got to be able to convince people that the money that is now in the system is enormous and not doing a very good job. There can be better ways of using these sums and finding ways of adding to it so that we do get a system that addresses all of the aspects of proper care, particularly at a time when the generation of seniors is growing so rapidly, as you pointed out.
That's a great point. I do think that we're thinking about cost in all of the wrong ways. In this case, I mean, I think the figures are that 2/3 of all of our healthcare costs have to do with carrying healthcare costs and needs for older adults. And I think that that has to do with the fact that a lot of the way that our healthcare system delivers healthcare to older populations is inefficient and ineffective and doesn't really build in that quality of care, quality of life piece. And I think that, and we in the campaign really believe that investing in the home care workforce, both in family caregivers and professional caregivers, and this training and the skills and support that they need to provide quality care. I mean, what better prevention than quality caregiving? Right? The fact that you have somebody there day in and day out who knows exactly what the person is eating, how they're sleeping, whether they're taking their medication on time, what their temperature is. In some instances, temperature is really key to monitor. I think we could actually save a tremendous amount of cost in our healthcare system on unnecessary emergency room visits or poor management of chronic illnesses. So I think that there are ways that an investment in caregiving can actually save the entire healthcare delivery system a tremendous amount of resources. And then even if we don't think about it that way, our economists in Washington have said that we could ensure that every single person, every single one of the 27 million of us who are going to need care by the year 2050 could have real choices for 5% of the defense budget, 5% of the defense budget. So, you know, I'm not proposing that we don't spend money on national security, but I think our budgets reflect our priorities, and we have to make caregiving a priority and send that message as a country. And so it's not this, when people talk about cost, it's as if it's this overwhelming mountain or natural disaster, tsunami that we'll never overcome, that's going to kill us. No. Like so much other infrastructure that we've invested in the past to be the foundation of a successful and growing economy, like roads, like public education, like electricity, like all the things that we know are sort of the invisible pieces of infrastructure that make everything else happen. We need to invest in caregiving in that way too. Mm-hmm.
So your work and this presentation are just stunning. And I say that it's probably to a question that I don't want to be divisive. And also to underscore that the Scheinberg program is about class, race, and gender. And this has been a wonderful presentation on class and race. But I want to talk about gender. I mean, I think some of the best work on long-term care has been done by feminists who observe that in the patriarchal society, the work of caring for the young and for the old falls without anybody even thinking about it on women. And looking at the caregivers, she said they quite accurately, they're women. And most of the people they take care of are also women. And I just would love to hear you talk about the absence of the focus on the gendered aspect of the problem and how the understanding and energy that might come from focusing on the gender injustice of this problem can be used without being divisive.
Well, women really are on the front lines of this issue on every front. Women are still, actually women have a longer average life expectancy. So oftentimes when we're talking about who that 27 million of us will be, it is our mothers, our grandmothers, us. And then the family caregiving, 73% of all family caregiving is done by women in this country. And then over 90% of professional caregivers are women. And so on every side of this question, in every dimension, women are really disproportionately affected and therefore have to be at the center leading the solutions in our mind. And a key audience in the caring majority that we're building through our movement building work is key audience and key set of protagonists is the sandwich generation, the generation of people that are paninied between the caregiving needs of their aging loved ones and those of their children. And most of the sandwich generation are working moms who are struggling, working hard, caregiving constantly. And they're doing it in isolation. And a lot of their family caregiving responsibilities are, as you said, completely taken for granted. They also happen to be a constituency that is becoming more and more important during election cycles. They are also the most active online of any constituency because they lack the time to go shopping and do whatever else. So they purchase online, they engage civically online. An organization that we partner closely with called Moms Rising has an audience that's incredibly active of moms, most of whom are sandwich gen, who 2 million moms that are an exact reflection of the census in terms of demographics. And I think that these voices are going to lead the way, lead the charge towards the kinds of solutions that will lift all boats and actually create the win-win that we're looking for here. And finally, I'll say that I'm very much influenced by this article that Gloria Steinem wrote 20 years ago in her book, Moving Beyond Words. It's called Revaluing Economics. And what she talks about in that article is the fact that there are these two invisible resources upon which everything else in our economy and society rely upon and are driven by, based upon. One is the planet's natural resources, and the second is the work that goes into raising and supporting families. That life force that is about raising families, supporting families across generations. And our society and our economy over time has evolved in such a way that has intentionally made those resources invisible, taken for granted, not accounted for them, such that we don't even see, we don't even think about how we are extracting from those resources for everything else. And she says that any vision for a economy that actually is sustainable and allows for more democracy and more people to thrive and have opportunity has to fundamentally revalue those two natural resources or those two forces within our society. So she believes the planet's natural resources and the work that goes into caring for families need to be at the center of our economic vision and revalued. And I think that that is, if ever there was a feminist vision, that's it. And it, like all feminist vision, in my mind, it is actually about democratizing opportunity and dignity in our world. It's not about women. It's about how do we create a society that actually honors and recognizes everyone's dignity. So, yes. Mm-hmm.
So we have time for one or two more questions.
Okay. Somebody who hasn't, yes.
I do research with family members, and I think that leveraging unpaid family caregivers with the domestic workers is just huge. And a really important area to work on. But you mentioned a home care lobby, and I think, could you just say a little more about the home care and the nursing home lobby? They seem like the biggest enemies kind of here. Or,
There are definitely barriers to progress. The lawsuit that was filed against the Department of Labor for the home care rule change was filed on the behalf of 3 entities. One is the International Franchise Association that represents all franchises. And then the other is the Home Care Association of America. That is the industry lobby for all the home care agencies. And there's also a very, very well-resourced and powerful nursing home lobby, but I don't think that they were on the lawsuit. And they are really fighting for their life because I think that the nursing home industry knows that the future of long-term care really is in the home and community. That recent AARP survey that found that 90% of Americans would prefer to age at home and in place is just like a very obvious, overwhelming litmus test for where people are in this country. And so I think they're hanging on for dear life. But it is, I think, an inevitability that we will, right now, we're off balance more towards nursing homes, less home and community-based options. Ultimately, I think we'll flip.
but 80% of long-term care happens at home. So it's the payment, right? I mean, so much more money goes to nursing homes.
Exactly.
But more care actually happens at home.
That's exactly right. So I think our system needs to resource more home and community-based options, and it needs to kind of flip in that way. I also think that there will always be a role for nursing homes, that for some people that will be the form of care that makes sense. And in that case, there's been this culture change movement within the nursing home industry to try to make nursing homes more humane as institutions and more home-like in their environment. I think that that's critical because I do believe that there will be a role for nursing homes and other institutions in the future. But yeah, the industry lobby, just like in any other industry, poses real challenges to us.
One last question.
Hi, I'm not sure whether we should open this whole can of worms, but you did mention trade unions, and I was wondering whether you might speak to a little bit more about the integrated strategy of the future that labor might be asked to play.
Labor has historically played such a huge role in this industry. The home care unions have a 30-year history, and the origins are in Chicago, where migrant home care workers migrated from the South, from Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, to work in cities like Chicago and New York, basically earning poverty wages. They came together and recognized that their path to economic opportunity was through working collectively and trying to form a union, and those were the origins of the home care unions. And in SEIU and AFSCME, they're predominantly concentrated in those two unions. I believe that today there are about 600,000 unionized home care workers around the country, and those unions have built some of the best training institutions for home care workers in the nation. The Washington State Training Fund that I described was built by an SEIU local, and it is a state-of-the-art, beautiful facility. So I think that unions have historically been the path out of poverty for this workforce, even though the wages are still very, very low. Like, we have not made as much progress as we need to, but they have made a tremendous amount of progress and a tremendous difference in the lives of home care workers who are part of the unions. But I think that it's not enough, and in fact, a lot of Supreme Court cases and efforts on the part of industry to undermine the strength of unions have basically made it such that it is nearly impossible to unionize new groups of workers. It's just so hard. And so I think we have to be really creative about how we conceptualize worker voice and improving these jobs and job quality. And I think it will involve working together with family caregivers and seniors and people with disabilities, consumers, employers, all of us together. And in many ways, that is what Caring Across Generations is trying to do. It's trying to say, we are, in this caregiving relationship, we are all interdependent. And that us versus them model has never worked in this industry. And so we actually should come together because together we are incredibly powerful and we're incredibly representative of this country and all of our diversity, and find the solutions that meet all of our goals, which are all interconnected and interdependent. So the unions have joined in this effort, and they are supporting it, and it will take many more institutions, organizations, families joining on board in order for us to get to where we need to go in terms of wages and working conditions, let alone the entire long-term care system. Thank you.
So thank you so much for giving us so much to think about in terms of new ways of working, new ways of caring, and also a sense of passion about the importance of the work to be done. I hope you'll all join us. We're going to have a reception on the 3rd floor, down that hall, down that way, the faculty library, wine and cheese, but best of all, the opportunity to buy one of iJen's wonderful new books and get her to sign it for you and trade stories about. Thank you.